What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Some NASCAR fantasy myself, Casey Steinman, here to talk about Indianapolis Motor Speedway. This Sunday, the 23rd annual Crown Royal presents the Combat Wounded Coalition 400, one of the most historic tracks in all of motorsports, Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And a track, to me, when I think about it, it's very difficult to deal with because it's such a finesse track. The problem is if you don't get your corners right, and I've actually had to set cars up for this track, and you'll have a variance in opinion which turns mean more. To me, I always wanted to make sure that the exits of turn 2 and turn 4 were right. Because if you don't pick speed up in those turns to carry them down the front stretch, you will dog it all the way down and lose a majority of your time. Now, there's some people that would lead you to believe that it's the entry to 1 and 3 that set those up, but I never really saw it that way from a shock perspective. But to me, this is also a track, in saying that, where horsepower means a lot and handling does too, because if you don't have those two things working in synchrony, you are going to lose a lot of ground quick.
But and you saw those trends that you were just talking about play out today in qualifying. Some of the drivers were better in than off, and other drivers better off than in. And you saw the variance in times down the front stretch and down the back stretch. So for my trends, though, I'm going to focus this week on really a 10-year domination of the larger multi-car teams in a race that typically has very few cautions but plenty of drama. Even the casual fan would know the names of the top 5 finishers over the past 10 years. It's kind of a who's who of NASCAR. There's no reason to expect anything different this weekend. And in fact, on Sunday afternoon, I think the leaderboard will probably look more like the results of a NASCAR driver popularity contest than those of a race result.
I generally try to stay away from cars that start on the pole, but Kyle Busch has set this place on fire the last few times he's been there. I also like Tony Stewart a lot. Again, he's starting very high, and I know it's a risky in terms of you're not going to gain that many points, but this is Tony Stewart's last race at his home track, and I think if anyone is going to do well here, it's going to be him. And then I also like Jimmy Johnson a lot. He's didn't really get the starting spot he wanted. As you mentioned, the car seemed a bit slow. He did try to pick it up on the last-second run, and this car just really didn't have the speed in it as late as he went. But I think he's really going to improve from 13th on a track that you really don't see a lot of variance through the field. It's very difficult to pass here, just like we talked about last week with Loudon. So, you know, the higher money drivers are going to be obviously where you want to go because they're going to be stable. But to me, that's 3 drivers I'm really honed in on.
My top 3 drivers this week have all had consistent success at Indy, and I think that's an important factor, especially for this race, is consistency. And you talk about that a little bit with Kyle Busch. You know, you hate to, from a fantasy perspective, you hate to pick the guy that's on the pole, even the guys outside the pole in the first row. But you just can't deny Kyle Busch at Indianapolis. This guy has set this place on fire. He's an absolute monster there. And I think that, he's my pick to win this weekend. And I think he'll start up front, obviously, starting on the pole, but I think he's going to stay there all day. Typically, we see about 6 lead changes in this race. I don't think we're going to see that this week. I think Kyle's going to get out there. I think he's going to run away with it. He's got 1 win and 2 second-place finishes over the past 4 Cup races here. He comes into this race tomorrow with 9 top 10 finishes in 11 Cup starts at Indy. That's incredible. So it doesn't get much more consistent than that, and consistency is going to be the key this weekend. My next driver to watch is the Hendrick Motorsports 48 that you touched on. He was fastest in the first leg of qualifying, dropped off a little bit in the second round, but he's got 4 victories here over the past 10 races and a second-place finish here in 2013. So I think the 48 team will be up front all day as well. And for my third pick this week, I'm going to go with the number 19 Joe Gibbs Toyota, Carl Edwards. He's shown tons of power again, which is no surprise from these Gibbs Toyotas. This is something that we've seen all season long, week after week. And I go back to that word consistency again. This is a track where that consistency from the first half of the year really pays off. He's the odds-on favorite in the garage this week. And I think really it'd be more surprising not to see at least 2 of the Joe Gibbs Toyotas inside the top 10 at this race.
As far as my middle-tier drivers, I hate to actually throw Joey Logano in this lump because he's certainly not going to cost you what a mid-tier driver is. But when I look at the drivers I really like in terms of point production, I look at drivers that didn't qualify very well and obviously were faster in practice than they show on the qualifying grid. The first stop has to be Joey Logano. He did make it out of the second round, but he has shown good power. You know, again, you talked about not so much about the Fords, but there's a lot of power that those cars are making too. You look basically through the field. Basically, your top 10 in points have been consistent. That's why they're there in the top 10 in points. You go further down, it's hard for me to take Jeff Gordon seriously because I don't know what kind of shape he's in. I know Jeff Gordon's not one that really works out. He gets in race car shape. And I also don't know how much time he's really spent in this actual car. And also the mindset of he was going to retire a few months ago, and now he's back in the car driving. I think that probably is going to have a profound effect. And then lastly, I would go, believe it or not, with Danica Patrick. Danica looked really strong in practice. It looked like she was going to run well in qualifying. And then I just don't know what she did on her qualifying lap. She didn't get up to speed well, and that hindered her entire last lap. And I honestly think she's going to improve more than people would normally think she would. I know she normally starts mid-20s, but I feel like she has a real chance to go up and pass guys like Buescher, Bain, Biffle, which she normally races around anyway. So I feel like that's going to be a good place to get some points at a pretty economical cost.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, especially with Logano to start with, they've just had no speed today. They've had a great week, really. But that didn't translate in qualifying this morning. So I think there's a great opportunity to pick up some points there. I can't really consider him a mid-tier driver from a fantasy perspective and trying to fit in the salary cap. So I'm going to start mine off with Tony Stewart. He qualified third earlier today, and we know that he makes his home in Indiana. He's an Indiana boy, and few things mean more to this guy than winning at Indy. So look for a solid performance from the 14 team. I don't think it'll be too surprising to see him finish up, in the top 10 this weekend. My second driver that I think I'm going to put in this group this week is going to be Casey Kane. He didn't make it out of the first round of qualifying either, but he's had a great week of practice. He was fast during the week. They were kind of hit and miss on a couple different setups. I think going back to where they unloaded the car at, and he finished third here in 2013, I want to say. So rolling off in the 26th spot, I think that's a great opportunity to pick up some points. So I think we'll see him gradually work his way up and probably finish in the top 10 or 12 by the end of the day. The third driver that I'm going to go with here is actually the 2013 Indianapolis champion, Ryan Newman. Team's having a solid year. Nobody's really talking about him too much. They're consistent week in, week out. They have good cars. They're not super fast. They don't handle super great, but they're consistent, and they're always finishing, up in the first half of the field. And I think they're quietly having a pretty decent year. So I think this might be his best shot of the year. I can see him finishing somewhere close to that qualifying position of sixth.
All right, and some guys I want to stay away from. It's interesting, a lot of times people look at this and say that you can drive it like a road course. But road course drivers are really not had a lot of success here. So with that in mind, the first driver I want to stay away from is A.J. Allmendinger. This is a track that you can really get in trouble if you overdrive, and I think that Allmendinger is great for overdriving. The other driver kind of in that same light is Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who honestly seems like he is in the wall within the first 25 laps before most drivers I've ever seen in my life. So he usually does struggle early on, and I think this is going to be a place that bites him. He's starting a little bit high up for my liking as well. And then lastly, I hate to do this because I'm a huge fan of the guy, but I'm going to go with Paul Menard. I know he won the race a few years ago, but these cars don't really have power. I know you said a lot of good things about Ryan Newman there, but that is not transferred over always to the 3 and the 27.
Well, I agree with you, and we've seen that in practice this week and in qualifying. We've seen these multi-car teams, Hendrick Motorsports, for example. Jimmy Johnson is just tearing the rubber up, and Casey Kane can't seem to find the gas pedal. I mean, these cars are coming from the same shop. They're at opposite ends of the spectrum. So I think that's a theme that we'll see play out through the weekend. One of the guys that I'm going to stay away from, you mentioned a little bit earlier, is Chris Buescher. He qualified in the 22nd position. Looked like he had a little bit of speed, but I didn't really see anything out of him that gives me any confidence in him moving up. In fact, I think it's probably more likely that he finishes outside the top 25. I think there are some drivers behind him that you mentioned that'll creep by him, and I think he'll probably end up with a 8, 9, 10 point fantasy point day. So I'm gonna stay away from him. The next driver I'm gonna avoid this week is Austin Dillon, who goes off 12. I feel like for the money, I can pick up drivers that are going to accumulate more points for me. And I think starting 12th, I think he'll be lucky to finish anywhere around there. I'm not looking to lose points. It's just too high for me. So we have to remember this isn't just about picking a winner or going with your heart. It's about picking the drivers that are going to accumulate the most points for you for your DFS league. So people like you talked about before, like Danica, this is a track for her. This is somewhere where maybe you can substitute her in for one of these drivers. The last guy I'm going to avoid this week is the 43 of Eric Almirola. I really like this team. I like what they're doing this year. I think they've showed a lot of progress. They had decent speed in practice this week. The car seemed to be handling pretty well. I'm not sure what happened in qualifying, but they just looked like they were dragging cinder blocks behind them. They were super slow. The car wasn't handling. They couldn't get out of 4. And I think it's going to be a bad day for the 43 team. I think they're going to finish towards the back, so we'll stay away from Eric Almirola.